Hey guys, this is Amber Rain Davis from NotableInk.com, and I am hopping along with Altenew as their guest today for their June 2019 standalone die release. There are so many great dies in this release, and I'm going to be focusing on 3 of the sets in this video. Make sure you hop along with us as there's lots of prizes and just tons of inspiration of different kinds on the hop. So we're going to be using the Color Wheel Die, Virginia Rose 3D die, and also Dainty Bloom's cover die. So we're going to start off with the Color Wheel die, and I decided to swatch out my Tropical Fiesta watercolor markers. There are 10 slots for this particular die and 10 markers in each set. So you can see you get the die that cuts out all of the swatches, and then you also get a large circular die so that you can cut out the overall wheel. So you can put the 2 dies together and cut this out of any color cardstock. That will overlay my color wheel. And then what I decided to do to create a template is go ahead and take the die and dry emboss a piece of watercolor paper. I'm using my favorite paper, which is Saunders Waterford High White Rough Paper, but you should use whatever paper you're going to be using for your project so that you get a true representation of your colors. So here I just took my watercolor markers straight to the paper on my dry emboss template, and then I drew the color out with a wet brush. I'm using the die to overlay it to make sure that I don't have any white spots peeking through, and I'm just going to continue to add the colors. I did the colors the way that they were presented on the packaging. However, I would switch Sweet Leaf and Lime. Lime is more of a yellow green, so if I were to do this again, I would put that next to the yellow rather than having Sweet Leaf next to the yellow. Now, the best part about this is that this, once it's cut out, fits perfectly inside the watercolor brush marker packaging, which I did think is just so cool. So that's how we'll store it. Next up, we're going to use the Virginia Rose 3D die, and I had so much fun with this die set. So I have a couple pieces of that same watercolor paper. I'm going to wet the paper with quite a bit of water, and then we're just going to drop in some watercolor brush marker pigment. So I have rouge here. We're also going to use ruby red, and then I think we use fresh lemon. We'll see when it comes up, but I'm really just making it messy. I kind of want to have somewhat of an ombre effect because I want to be able to cut out my layers for the 3D die and have some light and dark areas so that we can create more dimension with the colors and not just the layers of paper. So now I have this is either a 10 or a 12 round brush, and I'm just slapping on the water and getting that pigment to move. After I get this all blended out, I'm also going to bring some more ruby red into the top. Now, if I were to do this again, I think I probably would have left some white areas on the paper just for some variation. By the time I'm done with this and this is done drying, it looks a little flat. So what I end up doing later on is also adding some ink smushing to these pieces after I've die cut them, but I'll show you that. So we're going to do a green piece for the leaves. And the leaf clusters aren't layered, so I definitely want to make sure that I have more variation in color on this piece. And when I die cut them, I'll actually die cut some of the clusters, partway on the dark moss and partway on the limeade so that I can get a little more variation even within each cluster. So I'm using less water with this, and I'm going to leave this one a little more messy, which is what I would recommend. Again, I'd probably leave a little bit of white spaces too if I were to do this again. So I'll just set those aside to dry. Actually, no, I don't set them aside to dry. I will heat set them. So I heat set both of them. If you can set them aside to dry, I do feel like they dry a little nicer that way. But if you're rushed for time, definitely use your heat tool. And when I cut these, I'm going to go ahead and cut all the layers for 2 orange flowers. I wanted to make sure that my tape really was on the die and then the back of the paper. I didn't want to have my tape on the die cut because I've had my paper tear before that way. So you can see I'm just wrapping it around the back of the paper. And I will do one with the base layer in the dark red, and then when I go to do the other flower, I do the base layer on the lightest color and then move up through the dark, just so that the two flowers look a little different. So here you can see I'm cutting the leaves and the centers of the flowers. I decided to go green as well. Once I had those die cut, I decided that I wanted some blue flowers as well. So what I did is create a blue panel, and this is with Persian blue, turquoise, and mountain mist. I did the same thing. I covered it with water first, and you can see I'm not really giving any kind of care as to where I'm putting the pigment, or how I'm putting it down rather. I did want that ombre effect again, so I'm going to come in and add a little more of the two darkest colors, and then I'll just set this aside to dry. Once I was done with the panel though, I thought it was so pretty, I decided I wanted to keep it as a background rather than cut it up for the blue flowers. But then I had to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do for my blue flowers? I didn't really want to create a fourth watercolor panel. And here you can see I'm kind of playing around with the arrangement. There I felt like the flowers looked really flat. So I pulled out my Enchanting Washes pattern paper, and at this point I was thinking about, okay, well, how can I add some texture to those orange flowers that I did? I considered maybe using a layer of that. I decided against that, but then I found these scraps of blue that I had, and that's what I ended up using for my blue flowers. So, you know, you kind of just have to improvise. I mean, I could have made another panel. I didn't really feel like it though, so I knew I had this and I thought it would go pretty well. So you can see I cut out my layers there. Now, I felt like the paper had more texture to it. You know, obviously it's shiny and flat, but you know what I mean. Like the pattern has more texture. So what I decided to do was do some ink smushing on the layers that I had made to add a little more texture to those. You could have just, you know, turned these over and plopped them right into the ink there, but I wanted to be able to see what I was doing because I felt like if I just turned them over and plopped them in there, they'd end up being flat and not have enough texture. So they were still looking flat, so what I decided to do was add white spatter to them. And I only added white spatter to the orange and red layers at this point. And I will end up adding splatter to the whole project at the end. So for my sentiments, I decided that I would go with some vertical sentiment strips just for something different. And so I pulled out 3 from the sentiment strips set, which is awesome. I can't speak highly enough about this set. I love it. I feel like it's going to end up on all of my cards. So I picked 3 of them. I just stamped them with a block and I've got them there. And then I'm going to go ahead and start arranging these. So you can see my orange and red ones have a lot more texture now. And my blue ones look pretty good, but in the end, I decide, okay, the whole thing needs splatter. So one would think I would stop and do my splatter before getting everything adhered, but I didn't. So I'm just going to cover up my sentiment strips, which are also popped up. And I'll go ahead and use the pure white Altenew spray ink and just splatter that on. And I put a lot of it on, which I really liked. I liked the look of it. It's not a shiny ink. It's a flat white spray. So it's pretty awesome. Just make sure you shake it really well so you get the full strength of it. And I also put dimensional adhesive in between each one of the layers so that they would have extra depth and dimension rather than adhering them just with adhesive tape to where they would be flat. So there's a lot of dimension to this card, and I've got some of the leaves hanging off the side, which I think looks nice too. And sorry about the lighting in this particular clip. I guess the sun changed. So I just pulled those off, and that's the finished card. So you can see all the dimension here, all the nice splatter on there, and I just really enjoyed how that turned out. Now for my third card, unfortunately the only footage I had of this card is of me taking all of the pieces out of the center of the die cut, which I didn't feel was very useful. So one of the things that I love about this particular cover die is that it matches the Floral Garden stencil that was released last month. So I ink blended Rouge, Coral Berry, and Citrus Burst, or maybe it might have been Fresh Lemon for the flowers, and I used Olive for the leaves and the stamens in the center. And then what I did is just fussy cut a few of the leaf and bloom clusters. I cut the cover die out of white cardstock, put it on a white card base. The thank you die is the Simply Thank You die from Altenew, so I just popped that up. The flowers are popped up, and I added a few Nouveau ebony drops to it, and that is it. So here are the 3 projects all together again. Be sure to let me know in the comments. Normally when I do a video for a release hop, I do a separate video for each project. This time and last time I've combined the projects together in one video. Let me know in the comments which you prefer. I'm curious to know what you like better, so just let me know down below. Also, make sure you leave a comment on my blog if this is during the giveaway period, and be sure to join us on the hop for all the great inspiration. If you're not a subscriber already and you like what you see here, consider subscribing and hitting the like and bell button so that you're notified of more inspiration. Thank you so much for stopping by, and until next time, breathe, ink, inspire.